Oh, hello, and welcome to another CGC Show. My name is Simon, and today we're going to be talking about a practical application of theory as it regards to dynamics and expressive markings. So I think this might be an interesting topic. I was sifting through some of the comments in the forum at CGC Academy when I announced the second season of the CGC Show, and I'd asked people what they might be interested in regarding topics. And so this topic came about. There was a couple of ideas that spurred on this topic. One was specifically asking for a practical application of theory into our music. I think that was Mr. Scott Brandenburg. There was also some questions about choosing editions. I think Martha asked about that, and a couple of other people asked about that. And we're going to touch on that today as well. So I think it'll be an interesting topic. And as I was thinking about it today, it started to open up a bit of a Pandora's box in terms of, you know, what it means to be musical, what it means to us to be musical as opposed to someone else from another culture. And, you know, there's some interesting topics I think we can touch on here, but I'm going to see if I can keep it on a practical level. And it's a topic I haven't dealt with before, but I think we can find our way through it maybe together. So first of all, I just want to say hi to everyone in the chat. Thank you for turning up. For those of you watching across Facebook, there's actually, I would say the big hub of people is over on YouTube. And if you're curious about where all the comments are coming from, a lot of them are from YouTube on the Classical Guitar Corner channel over there. But of course, you're very welcome to say hello from Facebook if you happen to be watching over there. So lots of people saying hello. And yes, so Carrie is asking about divulging any stats on submission numbers, and what Carrie's talking about is exam submissions. So throughout the month of September, we've had exam submissions, and then responses are going to be going back through October. These are grade exams that we have at the Academy, and it's coming to an end now. And I believe that we hit the ton. Today we marked over 100 exams, not marked as in gone through them as teachers, but we have received over 100. So yes, Dave and I are both out of the running in terms of there's been a little bit of a guessing game of how many there will be. And I think there might be between 110, 120. So that's just more fun for us to go through and give some responses. It always is a great pleasure to see people progress and to see the work people have been putting in. And my gosh, for some of the exams, there's a huge amount of work. I'm thinking particularly of grade 8. It's really a recital and a huge amount of technical work, and it's a big workload. So I'm grateful for those who undertake it, and it's just really impressive. So, and yes, there's some people saying to smash that like, which is asking to click the like button if you're there on YouTube or Facebook. It does help for us to get noticed. We usually have about 100 or so people watching on these, so it'd be great to get around 100 likes. I don't know really what it does, but it feels good. It makes me feel good. So that would be nice. Yes, and then Rich is asking about how many more exams will come in the last 32 hours, and usually it's a lot, actually. There's a lot of exams that come in the last minute. So yeah, people are asking a little bit about Guitoberfest. We have an event that runs each year in Guitober, and we've named it Guitoberfest because I think it encapsulates the lighthearted, fun nature of what it actually is. And it has been different things in different years. We started out in 2014 with an in-person event here in New York City. Do you remember those? And we had different teachers come in, like Gohar and Colin Davin and Ben Verdery, and we had it was an interesting. It was sort of almost a precursor to the summer school, actually. That's what it was. And then the following 2 years we had it online, and that was really at the sort of the birth of Classical Guitar Corner Academy. It was one of the two big experiments that we did online. And then last year we had it in New York City again in person. It was a one-hit wonder. And this year we're going to have a whole weekend where we have guests from all over the world. We've got Richard Charlton from Australia. We've got Duo Noir from the United States. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to give away these. Nikki Tedesco, our fearless event manager, is the one in charge of all this. Hopefully I'm allowed to be able to say who's in it. In any case, I'm very much looking forward to this event. It's going to be on the 23rd through the 25th of October. I do believe we are going to have tickets for non-members, but it's free for all Academy members. So we're going to have a lot of Academy members in there. And the name, Gotoberfest, of course, and Mr. James Erickson and Sanya Plohl will be there as well. So sorry, Nikki, if I gave away the secrets, but it had to come out sometime. Yeah, so it's going to be great. All right, well, looks like we have everyone in and settled. So we should probably dive into this topic. Now, I feel a little challenged by this, so bear with me. It's the first time I've sort of tried to present this kind of topic, but we did well last week with a new topic of musicality. So what I would like to talk about is the practical application of music theory as it pertains to how we become expressive in our musical performance. Often it can be a little bit of a mysterious question to wonder, really, what is the point of learning theory? If we learn about phrases and subphrases and cadences and chromaticism and all of these ideas, how does that actually apply to me playing an instrument and making musical expressive? Well, that's what we're going to have a look at. I'm going to delve into some scores where we can have a look at some examples. But I also want to touch upon a bit of a broader concept of being musical. And last week we looked at the topic developing your musicality, and we tried to break some of the boundaries or some of the constraints we can sometimes have as classical musicians, where we think about instructions as very specific and unchangeable, black and white, if you will. We've got, soft here, loud here, this articulation, this fingering, and it shall not change no matter what, right? So we tried to break out of that and lead with our musical ideas and playfulness first, and then decipher what happened technically. So that's what we had a look at last Tuesday, and if you want to see that, the replay, which should be up on the YouTube channel. Now here I want to tap into the musicality in the sense of our shared musical language. And when we're talking about these musical concepts, it's important to acknowledge that they're not necessarily universal. So if you go into other cultures, you might find musical concepts and musical expression that's a little different. And we're specifically talking about Western classical music here, and it does play into other contemporary styles perhaps, but I once sat down with Fred Hand, who's taught at Classical Guitar Corner a number of times, and I sort of posited the question, what really is the difference between classical guitar and fingerstyle guitar? Because, when you look at some exponents of it, it's very similar what's actually happening in the hands, but it's different music and different treatment. And I think part of that answer has to do with the musical tradition we have and the language that we share. So when we're talking about being musical in the context of this Western classical culture, we're talking about learning how to express music so that someone else who has that cultural understanding of music in that similar way will interpret it in a way that we're intending. Because of course, there really are no rules in music, but what we're looking at is modes of communication that will be understood and interpreted in a certain way, more or less, by the listener. And so when someone performs and they have someone come up to them after the fact and say, "You're so musical, that was such a musical performance," what they're really saying is they interpreted it and it was meaningful to them. It felt expressive to them. It communicated something to them. That was their experience, right? Because no one can deem something musical or not. It gets a little philosophical here. But what they're really saying is my experience of your performance was meaningful. And I think part of that is learning the language. And we focus very much on the language of what they call sort of the common period. We've got like classical period, romantic period, and even early 20th century, a lot of tonal music. And if you've ever found yourself wondering or listening to music that maybe is a more contemporary or different than that, let's give an example of, if you've ever heard Schnittke or Stockhausen, or let's even bring into the classical guitar world like Brouwer's experimental period, the Eternal Spiral, or maybe Martin for Brief Pieces, or even things like the Britten Nocturnal. These musical worlds, these musical languages can seem distant from what we understand, and therefore when we hear it, we don't have the shared language that makes it seem familiar with us, and therefore it may not seem particularly musical. It might seem very unmusical, very devoid of musical expression, but usually it's because we're not familiar with that mode of communication. The more you spend time with that kind of music, the more you start to connect with musical gestures and ideas, and it means more to you. So I wanted to frame it that way because we are going to talk about musical expression in a very specific realm that we can find other examples of, and find plenty of contrary examples in more modern music and other cultures as well. So that's a little bit of background. Hopefully it's not too noisy today. I can hear a little bit of New York being New York out there, but I decided to leave the door open because it's a little spicy today. All right. So music theory, we learn things about chords, triads, cadences, relationships between chords, and phrases. So let's have a look now at some music. And what I want to do is I want to tie in the expressive markings on the score with what's going on in the music, and hopefully we can start to see a link. And then I want to draw a few more conclusions after that fact. So let me see if I can do my best now to, well, hopefully this should just work. And that's locked. Here we go. Oh, thank you very much, everyone, for saying they've lost the sound. All right, I apologize for that. It's just changing the screen. Okay, so we're going to start out with a piece by Johann Caspar Merz. And this is a piece I chose to start out with because I think Merz has done a good job here of marking in many of the musical aspects. So this is where we start to play into additions, right? Okay. Let's start out. What have we got here in this first measure? All right, let's just play. All right, now give me 2 seconds. I'm actually going to close the door. It sounds distinctly like there's a lawnmower out there, but there's no lawns in New York City. Okay, so what do we have? I want to tap into this here. This is an accent mark. Now, I did have a question in a coaching call the other day, and someone asked, an accent, is that always loud? Is that always a rest stroke? Well, an accent really just means that note needs to stand out. So here it is. So it's just a little more than the notes surrounding it, and maybe, so what comes before it is a little less, and what comes after it is a little less, and that accent is pushed a little bit. One more time. I think it's quite expressive to go softer after that, right? So we have a marking, we have a direction in the music there, that note is a little louder. We're going to push that note a little louder. And by default, the other notes around it will not be louder, pushed like that, so they're going to be a little softer. Why is that happening? Why is that marking there? Well, that marking is there because here, technically, we have an unprepared suspension. Basically, you can think of it like this here, these notes, make up a D major chord, right? And this note here, this G sharp, does not belong, but it does cascade down into that chord. So, as we're going to find so often today, we have tension to relaxation, dissonance to consonance. So, there's music theory there explaining why we have an accent. Let's keep going. Right. Okay, so now we have this nice big broad section here of accents, and we're at forte. I don't know that that is necessarily defined by the harmony or the musicality, but what I do think is defined by some of the theoretical aspects is this slowing down. So we have the tempo, right? We slow down as we come into this here. Now, why would we do that? Well, that's because we have sort of a half phrase here, the end of a phrase. So if we understand that phrase, we can then contextualize this request for us to slow down because we're coming to the end of an idea, right? And then we continue on. Let's keep going. Second line now. Same idea. Ooh, now what's going on here? Okay, so we have often, not as a sweeping generalization, if you've got an accidental in the music there, you can assume it's a little bit of dissonance creeping in. Dissonance, like we said before, going up to some resolution. And look what's happening here in the dynamics. We've got a crescendo, peaking up, and then decrescendo. So let's have a listen again, starting from here. Right? So we've got dissonance in the harmony, and we also have an ascending line, E, E sharp, F sharp, and we have this crescendo going up and then coming down as we relax into this consonance. So we've got a couple of, let's say, call them coinciding variables here. We've got an ascending chromatic line, and we've got harmony that includes some tension that then relaxes into this chord here. So it really gives a reason then for this dynamic indication. All right, next chord, why do we have an accent there? Well, it's that we've got our diminished sounding chord there. Chromaticism. Right? Now, I think it's interesting to note here, I could hear myself, given that I've heard so many examples of this, the need to become softer from that B to that A. Have a listen. Oops. Have a listen as I play that B to that A. Right? That's a really nice treatment of this dissonance, which is called a 6/4-5-3. Right? So we've basically got 5 and 1, but the bass here is giving us a bit of tension from an E7 chord going into an A major chord. But the point here is that there is no decrescendo marked, but I want there to be one anyway. Let me just come back for a second. So the point here is I've chosen this example to start out with because it has a lot of expressive markings included on the score. It gives a lot of direction, and they tie in very nicely to a lot of the harmony and the theory, the phrases and all whatnot. But we're not always going to have those indications to help us along the way. And that cadence there is a really nice example of it was not included. He did not include that decrescendo there, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't do one. So when it's tying this into that concept of our musical language that we're learning, we need to be able to understand that with a lot of harmony and a lot of ideas and things that creep into the music, there are implied dynamic treatments. And that's where that concept of being musical comes along. Because, I could play... that, but it doesn't communicate to you as particularly musical. However, if I did... Now, my actions, my techniques that I'm using there are not the musical thing. What's musical is tapping into your knowledge and understanding of this musical language. I'm playing to your understanding of it. And that's why, again, I'm a little bit tangential, but that's why sometimes I think this music can be considered by some as elitist. It's of course not elitist at all. No one would ever describe a rare language spoken by people in a country that's very remote as elite, but it's still a language that may not be as particularly accessible unless you spent some time to learn how that language works. And that's very much what's going on with the music here. It's not particularly more difficult than any other musical language. It's just that we start to get more ensconced in it, more familiar with it. And as listeners, we start to hear things differently. And as performers, we start to play things differently. It's all about that communication using that musical language. So I want to keep diving in. I see some questions, but I want to keep diving in. So I'll keep going here. All right. Let's find a few more examples. I'm going to pick up sort of where I left off here. Right? Another example there of dissonance. Bra. Right? Nice dissonant chord that relaxes down to an A major in inversion. And Mr. Mertz has an accent. So he's given us a lot of direction here. Let's keep going. Same thing, accent. Why? Because that's an unprepared suspension, a B that doesn't belong, going down to an A. I don't think I played that particularly well, but you can almost see visually we've got some congestion here and got some chromaticism, and to accompany that we've got this marked in crescendo and then a decrescendo as that harmonic chromaticism ebbs away towards our home base. All right, let's keep going to the end of the phrase here. Notice here we have the same material, but this time Mertz has not, or the edition has not decided to put in the crescendo decrescendo. Why? Because we've already tried to make it explicit back here, and it should therefore be implied. It's not because we're not going to do it at all. It's because it should be implied, right? And then finally on this line here, we've got oops. I'm going to hang here. We have a fermata and an accent and a rolled chord. A lot of expressive tools indicated. Was that So here we've got this hanging here because we're sort of right at the end of a phrase. And it's got this inevitability that it's going to collapse down to Now Mozart doesn't give us that satisfaction. He goes somewhere else. Surprise. And with that surprise, he's marked sforzando, with effort. We're going to push with effort, right? So all of this, all of it, ties in very, very well with what's going on in the harmony. I'm going to visit another piece of Mozart. I'm using him because he gives a really nice accompaniment of expressive markings on his music that help us see this correlation. And then we're going to delve into music that has far less. But it's not like the musical expression doesn't exist. We just have to be the ones that put it in there. We have to understand it, right? Okay, let me, now I'm going to move to another piece. I'm going to save you from the scrolling seasickness. All right, back to the screen. Here we go. All right, this is another piece from the Bard Sounds collection. Okay, so let's have a listen to a little bit of it. Yeah. No. Now, you may have gathered I am sight reading this, so I apologize for the wrong notes. But, okay, let's have a look at a couple of things. All right, forte risoluto. That is not going to be defined by the harmony. This is an example, and we're going to come across more and more of them, an example of expressive markings that are directions from the composer, not necessarily indicative of what's going on in the harmony. However, okay, descending line and a decrescendo. Descending line and a decrescendo. This, in general, is a very common way to play descending lines with a decrescendo. And if we had ascending lines, we would have a crescendo. And lo and behold, in the next measure, we have the crescendo mode. All right. Similarly, here we have again, suspension to resolution, and we have a decrescendo marked and a ritenuto, so held back. So not only is the composer indicating a decrease in volume, but also a slowing down of tempo, back to tempo. Exactly the same idea, crescendo up, decrescendo as the suspension resolves, and a little rit. Now, here, we have all these accents on the top. Why? Is this just the choices, musical choices, creative choices of the composer? No, it's the note that doesn't belong. As I've talked about in other CGC shows, I think in the first season, we talked about non-chordal tones. Here, the chord is A minor, A, C, A, and then the note that does not belong, the non-chordal tone, is the G sharp, and that is the one that is accented. Again, non-chordal tone accented. Here we have the non-chordal tone on the other side. So you can start to see why the composer has been marking all of these is because it makes sense. It's featuring a note that already has tension and just making sure he's being clear that you treat it in that particular way. Okay, so we've encountered two scores now where the markings, the dynamic markings, the expressive markings are clearly aligned with a lot of what's going on in the music. So now I want to move to another composer, another piece. Let's see if we can find. Now I think this is a nice example, one that many of you will be very familiar with. I do want to see, let me see actually if I can just get myself in the screen. That would be nice. Hello. I feel so distant. Let me make myself smaller. Alrighty then. I think that's a little better. All right. So here we have Adelita by Francisco Tarraga. Right? Now, got a couple of boxed examples I want to share with you. Here, this is an example of a marking. Sorry, this is the accent I wanted to mark. The accent is more indicative of a mazurka. Right? So it's not so much what's going on in the harmony. It's more of in this case, the dance is influencing some of those directions. Now, here we have a crescendo marked here and also made explicit here in the text as well. Sometimes, you might consider this redundant. It's saying the same thing, but really it's just being explicit. So why might we mark that crescendo? Well, as we saw before, sometimes these ascending figures will be accompanied by a crescendo. So if that wasn't marked there and we took it upon ourselves just to say, well, there's nothing marked, so I won't do anything other than play. Right? And just play it loudly. And I don't think it has as much musical expression, and it doesn't also frame the phrasing of this as well. I'm also doing a decrescendo here, even though it's not marked. But this, once again, is a suspension to resolution. Not suspension, sorry. We're just a non-chordal tone to a chordal tone. So I'm going... Right? Now, what's happening here? Here we have a ritardando. So we're slowing down. This is the end. You can see by a couple of indicators, the end of a section, and probably therefore the end of a phrase. From the beginning of the line... So, why are we slowing down? Well, we're slowing down because it's the end of a phrase. And often we will slow down towards the end of the phrase. It gives us a tapering effect and it frames the phrases very nicely. Okay, now here we have a nice example, this box here. We have a nice example of a decrescendo. Right, a decrescendo, maybe hang on. Oh, excuse me, is that? Decrescendo here, and also a rit because we're at a halfway point in terms of the phrase. And then finally, here we have a fermata, asking us to hold. It's one of my favorite t-shirts. It says, I'm a fermata, hold me. We have an ascending line with a crescendo. And here we have peaking at the top there, and then with a decrescendo, and we have a rit. So let's hear that in context. Sorry. Fermata. Ritenuto, right? So here, this harmony, it's very unstable. Could go anywhere. We've got a C that wants to go to B, and an A sharp that wants to go to B as well, but going up. And they do go there. So it's kind of unstable in a beautiful way. So we're going to hang right there. Oops. All right, so it gives some rationale for some of these directions, what's happening in the harmony. Ascending line with a crescendo, fermata, forte to accent that chromaticism there, and then resolving, slowing down, and getting softer, right? So we're starting, I think, really to gather that there's a lot of repetitive ideas in terms of these expressive markings. So we've taken now 2 examples of music that helps us along. And don't let me forget to talk about additions in this reference. Now let me see, what can I find? I want to find ones with some examples, but let me see. Some examples, but maybe not a lot. Okay, here's some. Shall we to Fernando? This is a beautiful piece, Fantasy à la Jacques, by Fernando, one of his last pieces he ever wrote. Now I'm going to skip straight to these blue boxes. Actually, let me play from here, right? Listen to the tension of the harmony as it increases. Sorry. Okay. So we've got an increasingly tense harmony, and then here we have a resolution back to something a bit more, less tense, right? So we have here, Fernando Sor has written in a forte to mark this increasingly tense harmony as it really gets to there, and then there, and then finally resolves, and he's also indicated a decrescendo. Next, in this box, look at the notes he's accented, right? Right, he's accented these notes that, again, I'm going to give you a couple seconds to tell me what they are because I mentioned them before. They are non-chordal tones. They are tones that do not belong in the harmony. Therefore, they give us some extra tension and stress. And we're just making it clear that they are non. So what would we do technically there? I'm just playing a bit louder, a bit more follow through on my free stroke. That's all, just a little bit of a push. What he has not marked, which I am doing by choice, is if you listen to the harmony over 4 measures. It sort of has a return there back to E minor. So I like to start piano, a bit louder, louder, softer. And that's me putting on my own musical syntax and my own musical intuition, and I'm starting to tap into things where people might think, oh, that's a musical intuition, that's a talent, that's your innate musicality. No, this is my many years of exposure to this type of music, both through listening, concert attendance, performing, all of the above. And I'm just imposing that idea because it makes sense to me. It makes part of that language. It's not an innate thing, it's a learned thing. It's something you can learn too. The more listening you do, the more performing you do, the more you listen to these kind of lectures and presentations, they will, it starts to become absorbed like a language. The language analogy is very good because, you can learn things, how to read it, and then speaking is a whole nother idea. And then having a convincing accent is a whole nother idea. Being fluent is a whole nother idea. And then being fluent in a local dialect is one whole idea again. So all of those analogies could be placed into music to give really just the depth of your knowledge and experience. So that passage would sound like build, vibrato, pause, a little bit of pause there. Now, what I was saying is very much what you'll come across in a masterclass where a teacher's working with a student and guiding them through. But all they're really doing is guiding through their own musical language what they suggest should be happening here as sort of a general implied musical syntax. And you can do this yourself. It just takes time to get used to these types of ideas. So if we look, I'm going to take something now. I'm going to stay with Mr. Saw. Where is it? One moment, please. I need to find... Maybe I closed it. Oh no, there it is. All right. Let me share with you now. This is the very, very famous Variations on a Theme by Mozart by Fernando. Beautiful, beautiful piece. Now, look at that first page. I can tell you from experience, there is a ton of music to be expressive in that first page there. But what do we have in terms of markings? Pretty little. Let's get my pen. We have a forte, great, thank you. A dolce, sweetly, great. I think over there, yeah, there's a little decrescendo, great, thanks. And then not much after that, right? So, okay, let's look at this. Great, that makes sense. Forte, then sweetly. Decrescendo. Suspension to resolution. All makes sense. Then what? No markings. Then okay, so plenty of musical choices I'm making there, none of which are indicated on the score. I'm making those musical choices based on my knowledge of the style, based on, you could do it different ways because there's not only one way, but these are all drawing on information that's presented. We've got the phrase structure, which I can hear and predict because it's relatively predictable. We've got the harmony. Let me walk you through it. We've got E minor. This is starting from here. We're in the home key of E minor, so this is a tonic chord, first inversion. Something a little different, a bit more intensity in the sound. Different again, we're climbing, E, F, G sharp. Half phrase, we haven't finished it. So we've got that ascending line. As we discovered before, often ascending lines are accompanied with a crescendo, and that's exactly what we've done. And I've brought that whole crescendo with that whole half phrase there. Let's see what else we have. Okay, we've got the theme down here. All right, I tried to go through that pretty, robotically. Now, let's see if I can make a couple of musical choices, and I'll try and explain why. Okay, so, and again, I've played this in the past, but I'm just hacking my way through it. I apologize for the little mistakes here and there. Now, non-chordal tone. Is it? Well, not really, actually, but we're doing a dissonance to consonants. Chromatic note. I'm going to lean on it with a little bit of a rest stroke because I want to bring it out. again, that would be marked with a little decrescendo and maybe an accent on that note. Dee, dee, if it'll work. There we go. And then here, peak of the phrase, highest note. I might do a little sort of quasi-fermata, a little bit of a hold there, or tenuto, plus maybe it's forte. Then decrescendo with maybe to mezzo forte or piano, right? So, what am I doing? Really, when I'm adding all of these in, one, I'm adding in my own musical choices, but I'm actually making my own addition. And this is a question that did come up, and this doesn't fully answer the question, but one of the things that we need to take into consideration when choosing a musical addition is we're really, and especially if it's a case of a well-known work that's widely available, what we're really choosing in an addition is someone's interpretation of it, so someone's musical choices that are laid out probably very explicitly like I'm doing now on the sheet. And then also a lot of it has to do with fingering choices as well, which can be quite tied in to the music. So I noticed that it's 10 minutes to the hour. I was talking to Dave about giving presentations like this, and I said how surprising it is how fast the time goes. I have more examples, but I'm going to leave it at that. I hope the point has been clear. I don't want to address any questions that came up. So if you do have some questions that you've written, please write them again. It's a little hard sometimes to, I haven't looked at the, haven't been looking at the questions as they've been going along. So let's see. I think Dave and Nikki have been answering a lot of questions, which is great. Thank you. Yeah, interesting. Okay. Bill asked a great question. He said, if my expression is substantially different, do we have the same piece of music? Now, this starts to get into a philosophical world of conversation. And on one way to think about it is through the lens of communication. And if as I said, there are no rules with any of this. You can really do anything you want. However, you will probably lose the musical connection with a listener if you do things that is too abstracted from their musical language or musical culture that they're used to. Doesn't mean it's right or wrong. You can experiment, you can do all sorts of things, and maybe through experimentation you find something that's really good that hasn't been come across before. There's a term which is sort of talks about the felt experience. It's phenomenology, where the idea is you can have one performer up on stage and 1,000 people in the audience. And I used to work, my job, one of my many jobs as a student was as an usher at Wigmore Hall and Angel Place in Sydney. And I often would not look at the performers all the time, but I would be looking at the audience. I was pretty transfixed by the concept of one soloist. Often they had piano recitals. It's a big hall. And they had one solo piano player and this whole hall full of people all receiving those sonic waves. And without a doubt, they're interpreting it differently. Everyone's an individual in that concept. For some people, they've played the piece. That affects how they listen. For some people, they love the composer. For some people, they've never heard it before. For some people, they had a long day at work. They don't care. For some people, they're trying to impress a date. All of these variables in the listening experience will influence how that comes across. So you can get quite philosophical here. But what we're learning, what we're tapping into is something that is often in a lesson situation described or like assigned or prescribed information. We say, here you want to get softer, or here you want to get louder because the line's going up. But what I'm trying to tap into is a little bit of a shortcut around that, where we start aligning our musical theory understanding with expressive concepts, expressive markings on the score. Because if we come across, there's a lot of music that doesn't have much in the way of expressive markings. And we need to be able to know the language well enough that we can then use the musical content as our guide to create those expressive moments instead of asking someone to dictate what the expressive markings should be. This is sort of the point. I'm going to zoom to the end now to see. I think there's some questions. Hans asked, is this all personal interpretation and would Mozart be pleased, or since he is long gone, doesn't it matter? Well, the great joy of playing this music and listening to it and admiring great exponents of this music is the interpretation process. If there was one way to play it and someone did it and recorded it, great. Then we'd just be like, it's done. You know, we don't no other reason to keep playing it. But really, it's the meld of the performer and the composer and the listener. Those three components make each experience very different. And that's why we all, I can assume, get hooked onto this experience of composing and performing and listening, because it's constantly being transformed. That's one of the joys. So I think I personally love hearing new interpretation and ideas. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, and that's my opinion. You know? John asked, what do I do or where do I go to keep learning about this? Well, the reason I'm laughing is sort of, honestly, I think most music teachers are trying to teach this all the time. Maybe they don't teach it as explicitly as a concept, like I'm talking about it right now. I'm always trying to impart the bigger picture whenever I'm talking about, like if we take up one small moment in a piece, like we'll say, okay, roll this chord and decrescendo to the next note. But I'll always say, this is because it's a suspension resolving, or this is because this is chromaticism, or this is because it's the end of a phrase. And if we can start taking these larger concepts, we're really in touch with this information all the time. So you learn about it constantly at universities, you learn about it constantly from music teachers, unless, you know, if you have a music teacher that just tells you what fingers to put where, that is a bit of a red flag that I'm not learning about this material. But I really like to talk about concepts like this because it's, you know, it's teaching people how to fish. It's not a secret. People who come and say, no, you must play it this way, and with a kind of maestro attitude, they're just sharing decades of experience, but it's not like they're special in knowing that information. They're special because of the time they've put in, but they're not special in that only they can understand it and impart it. Everybody can understand this. Okay. Thanks, Chad. Thank you for always being so positive. Appreciate that. Martin says, it would be interesting to write a piece with no dynamics and have a group of students play the piece as they interpret it and then compare the results. Well, Martin, I think that is a great idea, but you can listen to any piece of music by Bach. So Bach, anything for keyboard, well, okay, so harpsichord music, the harpsichord mechanism has a plectrum actually, and it plucks the string with a feather quill. And no matter how, so Scarlatti is a good example of this. So you can't have any dynamics. It just plucks it. And the harder you hit the key, it just plucks it. You know, the reason a pianoforte is called a pianoforte is because it can be soft and loud. That's our anecdotal piece of information for the day. But before that, with harpsichords, there was no dynamics, right? So the way they made the feeling of dynamics was through texture, more notes in the chords, and of course, shaping. But a lot of the music by Bach will not have many dynamics. And if they do, it's usually what's called terraced dynamics. So like big sections forte, big sections piano. It doesn't have a lot of nuance in there. But plenty of musical interpretations of Bach will have dynamics. It's inevitable. Go and listen to Yo-Yo Ma play the cello suites. Of course there's dynamics. No one is going to be playing robotically. So Bach is a wonderful place there to see what people do with that. Chad said, how would you play John Cage's 4 minutes 33? I'm going to perform it for you right now. I need my instrument. Okay, ready? There we go. Thank you very much. For those of you who don't know, John Cage's 4 minutes 33 is a piece that was 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence. The music just says tacit, 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 which means don't play it the first time. He went on later to revise it and say it could be any duration, which I just played a few seconds of, so it counts. The point there was to acknowledge ambient sounds. And John Cage is very philosophical, and so he loves sounds, and it's like, why is that not music? Anyway, I believe we all digress. So Daniel said, so learning the language, we respect, honor what was written, and offer our interpretation through our own musicality. Very much so. That's a nice way of summing it up, Daniel. I think that there's a lot of virtue to be found in this tradition and this way of experiencing music. It's not the only way. And it is not necessarily the best way for everybody. But there's really a huge amount to be gained by living and breathing this way of communication. And that's why people get so deep. They go down the rabbit hole, and they start exploring, well, okay, we can play Bach, but let's now really look into what it sounds like on a period instrument from that time and explore techniques of how they would have played it back then. So yeah, you can really go down the rabbit hole. Oh, thanks, Rico. And Christine, thank you very much, everyone. Thanks for the kind words. Yeah, Brent puts forward a really good point. Brent is a professional musician, by the way. And listening to... Oh, that's right. I was thinking today of topics for this CGC show. And one of the ones I wanted to do is about listening to music. And so, there's putting on a recording and just having in the background while you do the dishes, or there's really sitting down and listening, or there's sitting down with the score and listening. So listening to great exponents of music, great performers, doesn't matter the instrument, will give you a lot of this information through demonstration. And you start to absorb, just like, this is, if we start to talk about analogies, this is the analogy of being in a country and picking up the accent of that local area. If you start listening to lute players play Bach, you're going to start picking up on nuances of a lute interpretation, of a lute work, etc. So yes, 100% agree, listening is a great way to learn. All right, well, thank you everyone for the kind words. We'll wrap it up. And yes, thanks to Nikki and Dave for fielding a lot of questions in the chat. Great. All right. Well, on Thursday, I've got a very entertaining guest that I've lined up. Hopefully, we do have to make sure it works out because this person has some other engagements they have to move around. But I think it's going to be really fun if it works out. And that wraps another session. We're getting into October now, so we're getting into the last few. Oktoberfest is around the corner, so all those people in the Academy, please keep an eye out on the email and in the forum for information about that. It's going to be a great weekend. Nikki, our fearless event manager, will be running all of that. And yeah, all right, everyone. Well, have a great Wednesday, and I'll see you on Thursday. Take care.